According to the Charlotte Lozier Institute, over 60% of women who seek abortion feel pressure from either their male partners, family members, or from general circumstances. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 1 in 4 children live without a biological, step, or adoptive father in the home. It certainly makes you wonder when you know the stats. Do young men even want to be fathers? And how does this contribute to the abortion crisis happening in America? Hey, Pro-Life Gen, it's Kristan Hawkins. Welcome to this new episode of the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today to hear from a very special guest, Nick Freitas. He is a Virginia House of Delegates member. He's a Green Beret combat veteran, a proud husband and father, and you may have likely come across many of his snappy and bold videos on TikTok, Instagram. He's always sipping a cup of coffee. Sometimes there's livestock being talked about or in the background. Nick, I am so excited to have you joining us today. Thanks for coming on.
No, it's really my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you most of all for all the work that you do.
Well, it's certainly a team effort, especially there in Virginia. You and I were talking recently about what happened at Virginia Commonwealth University, and just the insanity that sometimes ensues on our college campuses and what's happening on Virginia college campuses for sure. And I want to talk to you today about these questions of fatherhood. I think this is a very important subject that doesn't get quite its due in the pro-life movement. But then I also want to talk to you about some politics too,
Sure.
since I've got your ear, and maybe where some liberty-minded politicians fall on this issue, and maybe some of your advice after serving for so long there in Virginia for other state legislators. But let's start with I guess maybe the easier stuff. I don't know. How do you think the lack of fatherhood fuels the crisis of abortion in our country?
I think if you look at any host of social, cultural, public safety issues across the country, you can draw a pretty straight line back to a lack of fathers being in the home. When it specifically comes to abortion, it's amazing to look at the statistics on this, because depending on who you're listening to, 60% is a pretty good number. I was talking to a room full of young men not that long ago, and one of the things that I told them is that if you wanted to fight back against abortion, one of the most impactful ways that you could possibly do it would be for men to just stand up and be good men, to take responsibility for your actions, and to ensure that if you do find yourself in a situation, first of all, you shouldn't, but if you do find yourself in a situation, because as I like to tell people, if you're not ready to be a daddy, don't do daddy things, okay? But if you do, and you get a girl pregnant, then you need to understand that you have a responsibility both to the child and to her. And one of the things that I find so frustrating about what's going on in society right now, and I think one of the reasons why we're dealing with this massive identity crisis, is because we've increasingly told men to be more feminine, we've told women to be more masculine, and guess what? Neither side is happy with it. And that's because men and women weren't supposed to be competitive with one another. We're complementary within our skills, within our inclinations, our biology. And the most infuriating thing that I'm watching happening right now in this country is I'm watching the abortion industry simultaneously convince men, right, fathers who we know are outside of the woman, the most influential person with respect to the decision to abort, telling them that this is none of their business and they just need to sit back and be supportive of whatever the woman wants. At the same time, what they're doing is they're creating a situation where the mother is now scared, isolated, and completely uncertain of her future. And then what does Planned Parenthood do? It comes in after it's isolated the man, isolated the woman. It comes in and it tells the woman, this is a way that you can demonstrate empowerment. And not only is it a necessary thing, it is a morally good thing, because this is going to be better for you and probably better for the child anyways, because you're not ready for this. And I'm sitting here looking at men saying, wait a second. Like, you're honestly going to allow an industry which is going to profit off of the death of your child, isolate you, isolate the mother of your child, and you're going to sit there and say, well, there's nothing I can do about it, or, hey, I support you. Give me a break. I don't know what we call that, but it isn't manhood. It is not manhood.
Yeah.
Step up, be a man, be there for your children, be there for the mother of your children. And I think if we could accomplish that, and the beautiful thing about that, it doesn't require legislation. It just requires men to once again embrace their responsibility within this role, within this relationship, within this family unit. Again, you don't got to ask permission. Just go do it. That's my dispassionate view of that.
You're dispassionate. Very dispassionate. No, where do you think the crisis with fatherhood just stems purely from the abortion industry's lies of neutering men, telling men they don't have an opinion, sit down, shut up when it comes to this? Well, I guess you can have an opinion if you're pro-choice, but if you're pro-life, not to have an opinion. But where else do you think this fatherhood crisis comes from? Because I remember back in college, one of the academic studies I had to do was on, the experiment of the Great Society and welfare reform. And you could look at the Great Society's LBJ social policies and how they dramatically changed the Black family forever in America and incentivized almost single motherhood. Where else do you think this fatherhood crisis comes from?
Oh, I think so. If you look at critical theory, and you look at Marx and you look at their view of the family unit, they actually saw the family unit as a positive detriment to society. They saw it as something that was standing in the way of them being able to create the new socialist person that was going to ensure greater equity and equality within society, and it was going to lead to a stateless environment where everyone's going to be happy and have plenty of food and clothing and healthcare and everything else. But they honestly saw the family unit as an impediment to that. And it's not like I'm speaking hyperbolically here. It's not like I'm misrepresenting what they were saying. Marx believed that critical theory took on a large component of that and worked itself in a variety of conditions within our educational system, within our culture in general. And so what you see is this idea that while certain mechanics might be necessary in order to propagate the species, this idea that we just take it for granted that the family unit is a good thing and a positive thing and essentially the building block of the rest of society is no longer taken for granted by a lot of people. And even more so with this idea that what is the man's role in modern society? Because we live in this world where all of a sudden men are being relegated to this position where they're essentially to blame for everything and they're good for nothing. And I think a lot of young men are hearing this message. And they're checking out. And they're especially checking out because this all comes with a worldview which says that, oh, by the way, there's no inherent objective reality. There's no objective moral law. And there's no ultimate meaning or purpose to the universe. That's it. We're all here by accident. And it's fostering this kind of hedonistic, view of the world where, hey, look, all you are is a bag of cells, then you respond to stimuli, and so this is all about just having as much fun and as much pleasure as you possibly can, and then you die and that's it. Well, I'm sorry, but none of that is very conducive to the concept of actually living for something beyond yourself and recognizing that what brings real meaning and purpose within your life is not simply responding to stimuli or racking up as many of these hollow, pleasurable encounters as you possibly can. What really brings meaning and purpose, and again, I believe from my worldview, it's serving God, it's recognizing an objective truth and morality about the world, and then it's operating within that framework that we all understand and know is there. Like the amount of effort that is going into denying the obvious right now, to gaslighting an entire civilization is just insane. And again, it's not making anybody happier. And so I think when we look at that sort of philosophy combined with a government which has increasingly decided that it is its role and it's now going to interfere in areas that we used to always reserve for the individual, the family, the church, the civic organization, or even the local community. No. Now it's going to be wise politicians and bureaucrats that will ensure greater equity and equality across the board. And they keep setting up these incentive structures which produce perverse incentives. And again, another comment from the perspective of a lot of men right now, they look at this as, wait a second, so right now you've told women that they should go out and sleep with whoever they want because that's empowering. And we all know it doesn't work out, but that's empowering. And so you see a lot of guys that are saying, well, there's no real objective moral law. There's no real purpose to anything. And hey, this is really fun. And oh, by the way, if I do get married and if I do have kids, she's actually legally incentivized if she decides she doesn't like me one day to leave me, take the kids, and I'll have to pay her to do it. So yeah, there is a whole host of political positions, policy positions, legal codes that have been put in place that I think are heavily responsible for the disintegration of the family. And if you're not building your society around strong families, well, then of course people are going to have this intense desire to want to engage in pleasure with as little consequences as possible. And now we've convinced them that literally killing the most innocent and defenseless members of our society is not something that's just practically necessary, but a demonstration of empowerment and a moral good. And that is about the most 180-degree opposite of the truth I think that you can possibly get.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You touched on something at the beginning of your comments in this podcast about the ideology, gender, because I was thinking about all of the young people I met and had conversations with this semester on college campuses, many whom were trans or, on the LGBTQIA spectrum. And it was very clear from the conversations I was having that these kids are unhappy. And many of them very openly speak about the trauma they've endured in their life. How do you think the lack of fathers or the fatherhood crisis is affecting that? Is affecting this suddenly this wave of like 25% of Gen X is like on the spectrum of LGBTQIA, which is just statistically impossible from every other records we've ever seen throughout human history.
Well, it's amazing the degree of sexual abuse that takes place in environments that people just don't anticipate or even recognize that it's happening. But there is a great deal of sexual abuse that happens to kids at a very young age, and obviously this just creates an incredible degree of mental trauma. And there was one of the most interesting and just gut-wrenching interviews I ever saw. Like you're just sitting there just furious as you're watching this interview. And it was of a convicted child molester who was explaining how he selected his victims. And one of the first things he says is, if I saw a child with a strong father in the picture, I never went after that child. And as much as you're furious with this explanation that is taking place, that should be a signal to men right there that if you ever question, I don't care what these so-called experts who have taken on this worldview and this philosophy that absolutely makes no sense. I don't care what they tell you as a dad about your role in defending your family. Go ask the predator what they think about your role as defending your family. And so if you want to set your kids up for success so that they are emotionally stable, spiritually stable, before we ever get to the things with economics or whatnot, just providing that sort of security, because there are people out there that do want to hurt your child. And the number one thing standing in their way is not a law, it's a dad.
That's absolutely right. I mean, what do you think, where are the positive steps that we can be taking as a society to encourage men to be men beyond just telling them, hey, man up? Because that doesn't always work, especially with a generation of young people, of young men who've been told, this is toxic masculinity, and, we need to stay away from telling men to man up. What else do you think we should be doing, or we should attempt to be doing?
Well, I think I will tell you this. I think it is this philosophy that's telling people, well, you can't just tell men to man up. Yeah, you can. Actually, you can, and I will tell you why. And I've seen this in raising a son and in raising daughters. Typically speaking, we're just talking about generalities here. Motivation for men and women can be very, very different with respect to what resonates and what actually allows people to feel confident going forward. But one of the things you do have to do with men and young men and boys is that you present challenges, is you give purpose, and then you tell them to get off their butt and do it. I don't care if it's hard. I don't care if it hurts. Part of being a man is you're the one that they call when the dangerous things happen. And you should take pride in that, because there's something inherent in us that I believe God created in us to fill that role. And man, when we fulfill it correctly, you would just be shocked at what they're able to accomplish and how they feel a sense of overwhelming meaning and purpose. And sometimes within some of the most, sacrificial and dangerous environments possible. And so part of it is telling men to man up. But the other thing is you can't just tell them, you have to show them. I think about the times in my life where I needed to be told to man up. And when another man came along that I respected, that had attributes and characteristics that I respected and wanted to emulate in my own life, and they said, Nick, get off your butt and do what you need to do. That spoke to me. And why did I need to do it? Because other people were depending upon me. That is a noble goal. So give men a noble purpose. And I cannot think of anything more noble in my life. I mean, when I think about the things I've had the opportunities to do, successes, failures, the whole deal. I loved being in the military. I loved being a Green Beret. I loved serving in combat with fellow Green Berets. I've enjoyed serving as a legislator. But the most important role I have played in my life is being a husband to my wife and a father to my children. That will be my legacy long after. Nobody could care less about what I did in the military. Nobody will ever care that I served in the House of Delegates 2 minutes after I left. But the sort of relationship that I build with my wife and my children will be a legacy and will allow them to be able to go on and actually live a life of fulfillment and meaning and purpose if I do it right. And so I think men don't need less responsibility. We need to take on more, and we need to actually embrace that responsibility. And here's the other thing I would say, because I don't want this to all sound like sacrifice and whatnot. That's a component of it. But I look at what's being sold, especially within hookup culture, to women and men right now, and it's despicable. You look at first wave feminism.
Oh.
And it was all about, we want equal rights before the law. And there's a reason why prohibition took place at the same time. It's because alcoholism had just wreaked havoc through families and through male society. And so they went for both. So the argument was, we want to be treated equally before the law, and we want men to step up and fill their responsibilities. And I feel like there was a component of especially licentious and irresponsible men that said, you know what, rather than us being better, what if we just allowed you to be worse? And you look at how things have evolved over time. And again, it's not working out for anybody, because it turns out you will have more meaning, more passion, more love, and more pleasure in that relationship with your wife, where you have built genuine trust and passion and loved, not just temporary lust. You will get more out of that relationship than you will 100 hookups. But again, we have to, those of us who believe it, better live it out and demonstrate it in a way that they can look at the way we live our life and say, I don't know what it is about that, but it works and I want it.
That's right. It's living out your faith. I think one of the other things I saw this semester, which actually surprised me, to be honest, was left and right students were denouncing hookup culture, particularly the women. Liberal women would agree just as much as the conservative young women that there's something wrong with men. There's something wrong with porn culture on our campuses, with hookup culture, because there's this feeling, this overwhelming feeling from so many women of, I can't get a boyfriend. There aren't men that I want to date. And this is a major problem. You think about the population crisis, and now we're below replacement rate here in America. Elon Musk has been talking about it. I don't even think he's particularly pro-life or against abortion, but even he says, well, wait, abortion's causing this problem, birth control, hookup, this is causing a major problem of, one of the things we have to do as a society is replace ourselves to continue our society. It's a very basic problem. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and get into politics. I wanted to ask you particularly about this. You have a huge following, particularly amongst liberty-minded conservatives. But we've heard a couple statements. So Tomi Lahren, she speaks on college campuses. I think she's Gen X, maybe Gen. Well, no. She would use Gen Z, maybe, maybe Z, yeah. but she states over and over again how she's conservative. She'll say she's a libertarian, but therefore she's then pro-choice. And she outwardly supports, the police and the government protecting citizens from violent crimes, but then always kind of goes into, well, abortions between a woman and her doctor. I don't think the state should have any role in that. And I've heard this before from self-proclaimed libertarians and more liberty Republicans. But I think, isn't being pro-life like the cornerstone of being a libertarian? Like, how do you talk to folks like that?
If you look, I like to use the non-aggression principle. So NAP, non-aggression principle, is kind of like the foundational philosophical principle of libertarianism. It's the idea that as long as you're not engaging in aggressive behavior towards someone else, live your life the way you want, don't infringe on the rights and property of others. And I think philosophically that's a fairly unassailable, building block, right? Don't use violence, don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. The question is okay, what is the moral principle which informs that? Well, the moral principle that informs that is if you shouldn't hurt people and you shouldn't take their stuff, why? Why not? Well, it's insinuated that because people have inherent value. Oh, okay. So they have inherent moral value, and so therefore you shouldn't infringe upon their rights or harm them okay, so when is that conveyed to them? And please give me something that isn't arbitrary, right? Because it can't be sentience, otherwise people in a coma, I guess we can hurt them and take their stuff. I guess when it can't be just after they're born, because that's just a different stage of development. So here's the question I ask, and I always lay out three things. The first one is scientifically, how do we distinguish between life and non-life? Well, we look at a variety of different criteria. There's about eight in general that we generally point to, and has everything to do with things like homeostasis and growth and potential for reproductive capacity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, great. Well, at what stage of your development do you meet that definition? Conception. Okay. All right, so at what point, now we view life differently, right? We don't treat cow life the same way we treat human life.
That's right.
So, okay, how do we distinguish between human life and every other type of life? Okay, well, we can look at a variety of different characteristics, but one of the most obvious is deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. Okay, great. So at what point do you have the unique DNA that makes you human and nothing else, and not only makes you human, but specifically you human? At the moment of conception. Okay, so at the moment of conception, what we now have is human life. Right? That's just scientifically unassailable. That's what we have. All right, and the next question is...
Well, that's just your opinion, Nick. That's just your opinion.
Yeah, the next question we have is innocence, because obviously we do view life differently. If one person murders another person, we view that very differently between the murderer and the victim, even though it's both human life. So it's a question of innocence. Well, at the point of conception, are you guilty for anything? Did you put yourself in this particular situation? Did you knowingly commit some sort of act of aggression against another person or their body or anything like that? No. In fact, if anything, you were the one that were put in a position based off of the actions, and the vast majority of time, the voluntary actions of two people that knowingly engaged in an activity that they knew could bring you about. So at the moment of conception, what we have is innocent human life. Okay, libertarian, non-aggression principle. Please explain to me why this is the one category where it is now morally acceptable to destroy innocent human life for no greater reason than convenience. I'm sorry, that your philosophy means nothing if you're willing to say, oh yeah, no, I think speed limits are authoritarian, but if somebody wants to kill their kid, there's no reasonable room for state intervention to that. I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't hold up. If you really want to be a libertarian that genuinely believes in the non-aggression principle, or wants to at least faithfully execute it as much as possible, then the only thing that gives that whole statement or that whole philosophy value is the belief in the inherent worth of human beings. And if that inherent worth exists, then it must exist from the moment they come into being to the moment they die. Yep.
That's exactly right. Take that, Tommy. I mean, I think anytime we hear this argument from so-called libertarians, it goes back to what you just said. And it goes back to what any argument you ever have about abortion ultimately is what is it? What is inside of a mother? Is a unique, whole living human being that's never existed before, will never exist again? Or is it simply a meaningless blob of tissue? And it doesn't matter, what you call yourself or what principle you're trying to use. That's what this whole debate always comes back to time and time again. All right, I want to switch roles again. You are responsible, I would say. You are a huge help for getting me back to Virginia Commonwealth University to speak there at the end of the semester after the Antifa and trans activists shut down my first speech. But I wanted to ask you, what the hell is wrong with the state of Virginia, Nick? I mean, it used to be like this calm, normal place, and we had our highest number of vandalizations, violence attempts against our Students for Life groups across the country this year was in the state of Virginia. So it's like, the legislature, is Democrat and Republican. It's split. You just elected a pro-life Republican, but, he kind of introduced kind of a weak sauce bill that didn't go anywhere in the legislature. You've got the college campuses. Like, what's going on in Virginia? I don't understand it.
So it was interesting. We had 2 years of complete Democrat control of the House, the Senate, the governor's mansion, lieutenant governor, attorney general. They had it all. And for 2 years, they moved the ball as far to the left as they possibly could. And one of the areas where they played the hardest in was in education. And look, we all know that the culture within higher education has just moved so far to the left that it's hard to see how much further to the left the Overton window can possibly go. And what we're also seeing has been this transition in the way that I'm even watching some of my colleagues in the General Assembly describe some of the discussions that we're having. So I want to hone in on something very important here. And it's this whole idea that speech is inherently violent if you're saying things that certain groups don't want to hear. And you also see this translated into where if I say, I don't think minors should have access to life-altering surgeries because they're suffering from gender dysphoria. If I say that, I guaranteed I will have somebody from the trans community say that I'm engaging in trans genocide. Now, genocide is an active attempt to use violence in order to wipe out or eradicate an entire group of people. So me saying I don't think a 14-year-old should get life-altering surgery because they're not at the age of consent and they're not mentally equipped to make the sort of life-altering decision that is now going to happen to them, right? That is now trans genocide. Now, you could say, well, Nick, this is just engaging in hyperbolic political rhetoric. We see it all the time, except I think this is a little bit different. I'm sure there are some people that are using that terminology for just the reasons I described, hyperbolic political rhetoric. There are other people that I believe are using it because what they're doing is they're setting up a philosophical framework to justify their use of violence and being able to say, no, when we do it, it's defensive because you said something that is going to lead to suicide, or you said something that denies our existence, or you said something that contributes to genocide. And so by the very act of vocalizing a contrary opinion, even one that does nothing to denigrate the humanity of the other person that you're talking about, can now be seen as an act of violence to which they can retaliate using physical violence. And we are seeing the moral justification for this be created. Oh. And so I'm very grateful to the fact that again, part of what needs to happen is we need to continue to go back to in these environments. Whenever I get invited to talk to any sort of student group, they always go to the top of my list. We have to continue to go back into these environments because sometimes we're the only ones that are willing to speak any sort of truth or any sort of narrative that's contrary to the one they're being fed within the university system. And I think it's absolutely important. And there will be times where it will get increasingly dangerous because and this isn't liberal, it's leftist. I want to make a distinction there. There is a leftist movement which essentially believes ends justify means, and if they have to engage in violence, well, so be it. You brought it on by disagreeing with them.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, that's what my husband was like, what are you thinking going back to that school? They hate you. Look what they did last time. You're putting yourself in harm's way. And I was like, well, first of all, I got my bodyguards, and now the campus police has guaranteed they won't, shirk away.
We made sure of that.
But if I didn't go back to that school, the left would have won. I mean, this is so critically important that we continue to demand that there is freedom of speech on college campuses, and that those who may not fall in line with the left's ideology are allowed at least the right to speak, and to speak in a safe manner. Because if we don't, those freedoms will be gone. I'm 100% convinced of it now.
Oh no, you're absolutely right. You have your freedoms. I believe freedoms are a grant of God. You have them not because they were written on a piece of parchment that now rests in the National Archives. You have them because people believe in them and are willing to fight for them, defend them. And what's so important about what you're doing right now and the exposure that is happening because of instances like this is that what we've seen is that for decades now, within the culture in general and specifically within our university system, here's what we've learned. Cowardice is contagious. And what you've demonstrated is so is courage. But if you're not willing to go be courageous in those environments, if we're not willing to do that, then it is going to encourage people to sit there, fold their hands, shut up, and be silent. And I'm sorry, there's just no room for that anymore.
Exactly right. No, there really isn't, and this is the time. This really is a time for pro-lifers to understand that you've got to fight for those rights, and you have to continue to speak out. And sitting silently by contributes to more abortions happening. What do you think in terms of the state of Virginia? What is the hope for the state of Virginia? For, is the Republican strategy to take back Virginia to reverse some of the out of control abortion policies in the state?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we saw last year, this was interesting because last year there was only about 3 real abortion bills that got debated on the floor. One of them was just informed consent. Another one was mine, and that was the Born Alive Act, which technically is not even about abortion, except to say that if the abortion industry attempts to abort a child and the child survives, the child gets medical care. They get guaranteed medical care. You can't deny them that, or else you can get in trouble for it. Okay, we got 0 Democrat votes on either one of those. And then they tried to do a procedural rule change, where they could bring a constitutional amendment to the floor, and what they were advocating for was abortion up to the point of birth, no exceptions, and in some cases taxpayer funded. That's what they wanted. And what was fascinating to me, Kristan, is that as Mo and I went on Twitter and said, okay, here's what the Democrats are advocating for. You know what I got told by Democrats on Twitter? You're a liar. That's not what we want. Really? Because I'm looking at the legislation. I do have a basic level of reading comprehension, and that's exactly what this is going to allow. So that's what you want, right? You want abortion up to the point the baby is moving down the birth control and can be aborted. You're okay with that? Well, no, that nobody wants that. Well, apparently 48 Democrats in the House of Delegates do, because they're all sitting here fighting tooth and nail for it. So why don't you just be honest about what it is that you actually want?
I mean, the North Carolina governor, Roy Cooper, vetoed a bill that prevents abortions after 12 weeks. So it would only save about 6% of babies in North Carolina. The legislature thankfully overrode his veto, but he vetoed a bill that would have prevented late-term abortions only. And, by the way, give money to pregnancy alternative resources. So we now have on video, Democrats proving they support late-term abortions, because I hear that all the time. You're right. No one's for late-term abortions. Oh, really? Do you want to count how many times we voted on the Born Alive Infant Protection Act in Congress and had 0 Republicans, Democrats vote with us? Now you just gave that perfect example that what you did in Virginia. It's unbelievable. And I think it's important. We've got to get Republicans. I wish sometimes we would see Republican majorities in state legislatures act as if the Democrats do, act as passionately as Democrats do, and defending their radical, out-of-touch platform of abortion up until the moment of birth for whatever reason, and sometimes taxpayer funded. I mean, the Democrats are they're ideologues on this issue. They do not waver. They do not give an inch. They do not care that they are out of touch with 90% of Americans. And then on the other hand, we have, Republican blocs and legislatures are like, well, preventing abortions at 12 weeks. Let's do that instead of preventing abortions when the baby's heartbeats are present, or actually passing a life at conception law that acknowledges what we all believe in the pro-life movement. What do you say to those, legislators, those Republicans who say that they're pro-life, but then kind of get there and just
it is a very frustrating fight. And I'll just be, I'm a life at conception guy. That's what I am. That's the legislation I want. Now, the argument that I will get back to include from some of my Republican colleagues is, okay, Nick, that's fine. You believe that and I believe that. But the bottom line is that we will never maintain a majority advocating, running on, or trying to carry legislation to that point. Okay, maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. The larger question is what is the right thing to do? Now, I can have some sympathy for somebody that says, Nick, We have to at least have the House, the Senate, and the governor to be able to get this done, to be able to get this signed. And we need to at least recognize that the left rallies around this issue. The left rallies around this issue. They donate based off of this issue. They show up and vote. They knock doors. They do everything based off of this issue. And so we have to be prepared that there will be political backlash if you're going to do it. Now, my argument would be, I still think it's worth it to stand up for the right thing. Now, I understand. I'm in a district where it's very, very, conservative, very, very pro-life district. I have other colleagues that are in districts that are not so much, and this is an issue that can potentially cost them their election. The only thing I would ask is, what is the point of holding power if you're not going to use it to accomplish the things that you set out to do? What is the point? I will demonstrate some sympathy for somebody that says, Nick, we'll never get through the Senate right now. We need more time to be able to move the culture in our direction. I will accept that to some degree, right up to the point where we do have the ability to do it, and then we don't.
That's right.
Because at that point now we have to explain, why did we not take the opportunity that we have? And I want the people that campaign as pro-life Republicans to come forward and explain to their constituents and to the rest of us why they couldn't do it. What was the moral hangup? And if you're going to give me a political reason for it, I'm going to have some problems with that. Now, here's the last thing I'll end on with that point. I do believe, I honestly believe that part of the reason why we're in the situation that we are right now is because we have so failed on the cultural and the educational front. And that's why organizations like yours and what you do is so important, because you're not just battling in the legislature, because the legislature is downstream from culture. You're battling in the culture too. And you have to fight on both of those fronts. And we have to do a better job of making sure that our side of this story and what we're talking about, and the stories that are being shared by you, by people like Melissa Oden, by people like Gianna Jessen, that those are also getting out and demonstrating the humanity of both the woman and the baby. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to do. We are trying to create a culture where we protect and uplift and support both. And we're pushing back against an institution and an industry that has set itself up to profit from the destruction of innocent human life. And that's a noble cause. I can scarcely think of one more noble than that. And so, when some of my colleagues kind of tease me, why do you spend so much time on social media? Why do you spend so much time on this? Why do you spend so much time on YouTube? I'm like, the reason why is because you and I both know that when we have a floor debate in this building, we're not changing any of their minds. You and I both know that when the Washington Post reports on this floor debate, they're not going to do it accurately. We both know that they're going to manipulate this story in any possible way they can to make us look like we're the bad guys. Our story doesn't even get a fair rendition in the press. So I'm not going to the press. I want to be able to go, and I want to be able to tell the Washington Post, I don't got to talk to you. And the reason why I don't got to talk to you is because I got 500,000 followers on Instagram. I got over 300,000 on YouTube. I can do a video right now. I can do a short. I can do a reel. I can do a long-term podcast. And more people will see it than any article you put in your newspaper. And that's how I'm going to continue to engage with the culture and how we're going to foster a culture of life. Because the true victory for the pro-life movement is not just when we get a bill signed. It's when we have changed the culture so much that the idea that was ever acceptable that we could destroy innocent human life, that we could treat women this way, fathers this way, children this way, is so socially abhorrent that Planned Parenthood won't even have a customer if they could operate.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right, because it's, no matter what the law we advocate for now to get passed through a legislature, in 20 years, it could all be erased if we lose this generation. And, this generation, Gen Z, the younger Gen Y, the millennials, this is the largest voting bloc in America. And they're very diverse. They lean very liberal, but they can be won on the issue of abortion by simply telling them the truth about the violence of abortion, the discrimination that happens, the predatory nature of Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry. It can be won. It's not lost, but we have to actually do exactly what you're doing, Nick, and going out and speaking right to them. I mean, you I think you're a little older than me, but my gosh, you're killing it on TikTok. I can't even figure out how to get into my TikTok account. Apparently I have 3 accounts, so we can't even get into my main one. We have no idea. So you're doing an incredible amount of work, and I thank you for that and changing the culture. How can people first follow you? What platforms should they find you on? And then second, since you said you prioritize when students invite you to speak, where can students go to invite you to speak to their campus?
So the best way to contact me and invite to come speak on the campus, people can always direct message me on Instagram. We're at Nick J. Freitas, Nick4VA. You can always just reach right out on social media if that's easiest. You can also contact my Delegate office. And, right there, all you got to do is Google Delegate Nick Freitas. It'll take you right there to our Delegate office. You can find our contact information. It's delinfreitas@house.virginia.gov. But again, just Google it. You'll be able to find it. But yeah, if you want, if you want someone to be able to come and speak to this from the state legislature, I am more than happy to do it. And again, I really encourage people too, that as much as they can, support, donate, share your content. That's critical, because I will tell you, I have seen you in the thick of it, and I have seen you give some of the best responses, some of the best answers that really not only strike to the scientific nature, the philosophical nature of what we're talking about, but really embraces the humanity of both the mother and the child. And we have to make good logical arguments. We have to make good scientific arguments. But at the end of the day, we do need to make this emotional appeal on behalf of what's happening to children, what's happening to mothers, what's happening to fathers. And I don't think anybody does it as well as you've been doing it. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Nick. That's high praise coming from you. I am so excited to have you on to spotlight all that you're doing there in Virginia, and hopefully you get a bunch of new followers from this podcast. Thank you all for tuning in today to listen to this conversation about fatherhood, the importance of fatherhood, the importance of elected officials standing up, speaking out, the importance of speaking up and defending our free speech rights, which we so desperately must have in our pro-life movement. I hope you'll take Nick's message to heart and spread the word. Hey, Pro-Life Gen, June 24th, 2023 is going to be an amazing day. Why? Because we are going to be celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the Dobbs Supreme Court decision, which threw Roe versus Wade onto the ash heap of history. So, our team at Students for Life, our friends at Live Action, 40 Days for Life, and Pro-Life Partners Foundation have cooked up something very special. I hope you can join us in Washington, D.C. on Saturday, June 24th at the Lincoln Memorial for National Celebrate Life Day and our rally as we unleash a new dream for the pro-life generation. After the rally, we're going to be having a gala that night. That's not a fundraising gala. It's not like a dinner you've ever had, where we're going to be honoring the past heroes of the pro-life movement that ensured we got to the moment where Roe was reversed, as well as honoring those who are going to be leading our pro-life movement into this next era where we finally abolish abortion. So make sure you register now. Register now for the free rally and get your lanyard so you can get in. All you have to do is go to nationalcelebratelifeday.com and register. We'll mail you your lanyard so you can get in to the Lincoln Memorial Rally on Saturday, June 24th. And then if you can choose to stay with us, sign up that night for the evening Celebration of Life Gala. I hope to see you in Washington, D.C. on Saturday, June 24th.